Hey, this is Ina in with you in the Fight Back. Today I want to talk about the growth and the organic composition of capital. And to begin with, we need to know that all capitalist production can be represented by the following formula. Bearing this in mind, we should realize that the value of every commodity consists of two parts: conserved value and newly created value. And labor power, this is of course workers producing, has a dual function or a dual use value, at least in the minds of the capitalists. Number one, that of preserving all existing values in the instruments of labor, such as machines, buildings, etc., etc., while incorporating a fraction of this value into current production, and this would be the conserved value. Two, that of creating a new value which contains surplus value as one of its components, i.e., profit. Another part of this new value goes to the worker, and this is the wage. The surplus value is taken from the capitalists. And we call the equivalent of wages variable capital and designate it by V. Now, why is V, or variable capital, or wages, considered capital? Well, this value is advanced by the capitalist, and it constitutes a part of his capital which is expended before the value of the commodities produced by the workers can be realized. In a sense, he kind of has to pay the workers to produce the goods, and eventually, when the goods are sold, the money contained in them is realized by the capitalist. And following V, or variable capital, we call that part of capital which is transformed into machines, buildings, raw materials, etc., etc., whose value is not increased by production, but merely preserved by it. Again, this would be the conserved part of capital, or the conserved value, as constant capital, or C. Now, the portion of capital called variable capital, V, or wages, allows the capitalist to buy labor power, to hire workers, as it were. And this is the only part of capital, V, wages, or variable capital, that allows the capitalist to increase his capital by means of surplus value, i.e., to make a profit. After all, it is the working class that is exploited. They create value. This being the case, what is the economic logic of competition, or the drive to increase productivity, to increase mechanical means of production and machine labor? Well, the logic of this, the fundamental tendency of capitalism, is to increase the weight of C, or constant capital, or machines, raw material, and buildings. And to increase the weight of C, constant capital, and with respect to total capital. Now, in the organic composition of capital, which we relate in the following formula, now in this formula where C is over C plus V, so constant capital over constant plus variable capital, in this, constant capital tends to increase, or the part of total capital made up by machines, raw material, buildings is increased, but not wages. And this tends to increase with advances in mechanization and whenever competition compels capitalism to step up labor productivity. So that is the organic composition of capital. And it is the ratio between constant capital and total capital. In capitalism, the organic composition of capital has a rising tendency, which means there is a tendency to produce more of the means of production, more machines, raw materials, to increase productivity, as it were. Now, how does the capitalist acquire new machines? How do they actually acquire all these buildings and whatnot. What is the meaning of the statement that constant capital keeps on increasing? Well, the main operation of the capitalist economy is producing surplus value by the exploitation of the proletariat, of course. Now, the capitalist needs to sell goods, shoes, shirts, phones, whatever the goods happen to be. They don't merely have to produce them. Now, certainly that is where the exploitation is taking place. You produce your goods on an assembly line at a sewing machine or wherever you're producing them, in some factory, as it were. But just because you produce them, they're not sold. You haven't got any money back from them, so you have to realize that money. Those goods have to be sold on the market. And that is the only way to realize surplus value. So you sell your shirts or your shoes or your phones, you get money back. You get the value that was contained in those particular goods realized through the form of cash, as it were. Because unsold goods can't buy new machines with greater productivity. And if you're not bringing in a certain amount of money, you're not going to also be able to hire new workers to exploit. Now, in order to buy new machines, again, the capitalist has to sell goods, and a part of the proceeds of this sale can be used to buy new machines, or constant capital, C. Now, realizing surplus value is the necessary condition for the accumulation of capital. So if no one is selling anything, no one is making any money. That way, you can tell, in a sense, when the economy is good, when people are buying, because companies are getting money back, which they're using to improve the means of production and to hire new workers to exploit. Now, realizing surplus value means the sale of goods, but also the sale of such goods where the surplus value can be realized on the market. I know I keep re-emphasizing this point, but I do want to make it clear. Now, as soon as the stock of goods produced in a given period is sold, so say through your first quarter, you're at a business, you sell your goods, and the capitalist is, what do you do with that money? How is that money exactly divided? Well, the capitalist is reimbursed with a sum of money, which constitutes a counter value of constant capital expanded in achieving this production, or raw materials used together with a fraction of the value of machines and goods. So some of this money is going to improve the means of production, buildings, raw materials, all that kind of stuff. Now, this part that of the realization of surplus value that was used for the means of production is almost, in a sense, used to just maintain them at the status quo. It may not be really used to buy new ones, but so much to keep wear and tear. So if you're working at a supermarket and you're using a cash register, a part breaks. Part of the money that the business gets back is to make sure that the wear and tear of those particular machines, they're maintained at a certain working level. So you're not really updating your cash register, you're just making sure the old one is staying in a workable manner. Now, the capitalist is also reimbursed with a certain counter value of wages. So when you sell your particular good, the shoes, the shirt, the phone, some of it that was advanced is given to the worker, the wages. So they have the necessities of life. That's where your paycheck comes from. So we have constant capital and variable capital that have been taken care of. So now we go to the third part of capital, which is S, or surplus value. And surplus value is also when those particular commodities are sold and realized. When the money comes back, what happens is the surplus value that was produced by the proletariat goes into the possession of the capitalist class. And the surplus value is, in a sense, some of it is consumed by the capitalist for his necessities and luxuries. So if your particular boss has 7 mansions, he may want to buy an 8th one. If your particular boss wants to, he may want to bribe officials to make sure that, he can ruthlessly exploit labor without paying any attention to safety regulations. Whatever the case may be, or hell, he may just want to, I don't know, buy a new swimming pool or donate to charity. It's whatever the capitalist does with that, because They stole it. They're going to do what they want with it. Now, another part of this surplus value is transformed into capital. This enters back into the production process. The first part of surplus value that I just discussed is taken out of the production of surplus value. It is out of the production process, and it no longer concerns us here. And the second part, that is it transformed into capital, this part actually is used to buy constant and variable capital that is actually accumulated. So instead of just maintaining a particular cash register, maybe you're going to get a new one that's more efficient, that's better, that's faster, that can ring up more goods. Or you'll buy a new machine that can produce, instead of, say, 20 of my communist t-shirts in an hour, can produce 5,000. Something like that. Or instead of just merely paying your workers wages, you'll use some of the surplus value to hire more workers to produce yet even more goods for you. And this is part of the accumulation process. Now we can see why the accumulation of capital is actually the capitalization of surplus value. It is really surplus value, or profit as it were, that keeps going into expanding the production process. And we see how the process of growth in the organic composition of capital represents an uninterrupted succession of the capitalization process, or the production of surplus value by workers, always by workers, people, and its transformation by capitalists into more constant capital, buildings, machines, raw material that are better, more efficient, and whatnot, and hiring of more workers, bringing more workers into the labor process. Now, we can see furthermore, and let's stop here. We've gone through this kind of dry economic stuff, but it's important to realize, it's important to know how this economy functions. Therefore, so you can challenge it better. It is not the capitalist who creates employment, since it is the worker who creates surplus value. And as has already been emphasized, the surplus value created by the exploitation of the proletariat is used furthermore to build more constant capital and to enable more workers to be hired and brought into the production process. Now, if we look furthermore, and you can just look out a window really to do this. You can look in any city in any corner of the world, and you can see that all the wealth, all the machines, all the railroads, all the great buildings, all the great skyscrapers of the world was in fact built by the working class. That's right. Pretty much everything around you was built by workers. And this colossal proof all around us this shows, to beyond the shadow of a doubt, the continuous blood-sucking exploitation of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie. And the increase in the organic composition of capital takes place antagonistically, by way of competitive struggle. So if you remember the video about the fundamental mechanism of capitalism, competition is very much a driving force. And in a sense, through the competitive struggle, we can be summed up very simply as big fish eats little fish. And the competitive struggle is accompanied by a continuous concentration of capital in fewer and fewer hands, and by the displacement of multitudes of capitalists by a few. So the robber barons, as it were, they're all kind of robber barons, but you get the point. And what happens to these displaced capitalists? Well, they become managers, foremen, some of them become office workers, and some even become workers. So thus concludes this presentation of the organic composition of capital.